They called him a savage, and they called her a fool. But what if one widow's act of mercy could change the fate of an entire town? In the square of Dry Creek, a gun is raised. Yet Jace Callahan, chained and beaten, stands tall to shield the only woman who believed in him. Flames swallow a barn, and through the smoke he carries a terrified child in his arms, while the mob that once cursed him watches in silence. And when the noose nearly tightens, Clara Danvers steps forward, her voice trembling but unbroken. If you kill him, you kill justice itself in this town. Through fire, through shame, through the judgment of their neighbors, they found not just survival, but the courage to build something like family, and at dawn, Dry Creek would never see them the same again. If this story stirred your heart, share a comment below. We'd love to know where you're watching from. And if you'd like to journey with us through more stories of hope and redemption, please subscribe and stay close. The sun hung high and merciless over Dry Creek, bleaching the sky into a hard white blaze. Dust drifted in lazy spirals, stirred by the shuffle of boots and the restless stamp of horses. By noon, the town square had swollen into a restless sea of faces. Men in weather-beaten hats, women clutching parasols, children balanced on barrels with wide, eager eyes. They had come not for justice, but for entertainment. At the center of it all stood a rough-hewn wooden platform. Sheriff Randall McKenna, 52, mounted its steps with a weight heavier than the iron badge pinned to his chest. His broad shoulders were still strong, but his back stooped as though bent by years of compromise. Steel-gray hair poked from beneath his sun-stained Stetson. His pale blue eyes scanned the crowd without triumph, only fatigue. In one hand, he held the charge writ. In the other, a heavy ring of keys that jingled with each uncertain movement. Behind him came the prisoner. Shackled at the wrists and ankles, iron dragging across the boards, Jace Callahan emerged like a shadow carved from flesh. He was 32, tall, lean but sinewed, his dark hair falling in loose strands to his shoulders. A scar cut across his cheekbone, stark against sun-browned skin. The townsfolk spat the word savage as if it were his given name. Yet his eyes, black, steady, unflinching, met their glares with a silence more dangerous than any curse. His shirt, torn and sweat-stained, clung to muscles earned not in luxury, but in survival. Randall raised his voice, deep and steady, though it cracked faintly at the edges. People of Dry Creek, you see before you Jace Callahan, accused of stealing horses. His crimes demand punishment. By law, he may be sentenced to contracted labor, sold until his debt is paid. A murmur rippled through the square, swelling quickly into jeers. "Sell him off!" shouted a ranch hand near the front. "Make him break stone!" barked another. "Better yet, hang him now and be done!" someone cried, and the crowd laughed like a pack of wolves circling prey. Randall did not call for silence. He simply stood, jaw tight, as the voices grew louder. Then Dale Morrison stepped forward. Morrison was 45, thick around the waist, but broad-shouldered, his wealth built on sprawling acres and hired guns. His vest strained against his girth, and a silver watch chain glinted against the dark cloth. His face bore a permanent smirk, the smugness of a man who believed money made him untouchable. "I'll pay $50, Morrison called, his voice oily, his words carrying easily over the din. "Let him sweat his life away on my land." A savage ought to work until he drops. Laughter and cheers followed. Other men shouted bids, some higher, some lower, all hungry for ownership. To them, Jace was no man, only muscle, only chains. Through it all, Jace stood unmoving, the scar on his cheek lit stark by the sun. His silence was defiance, and that alone seemed to agitate the crowd further. From the far edge of the square, a different presence stirred. Clara Danvers, 28, stepped from the shade of the mercantile. Slender, with the wiry strength of a woman who had labored alone, she moved with quiet resolve. Her plain gray dress, patched and faded, whispered of hardship. Stray wisps of brown hair escaped the scarf tied at the nape of her neck. Her eyes, storm gray, rimmed with fatigue, carried the weight of a widow's loss, yet in them lingered a glint of something unbroken. The people of Dry Creek had pitied her once, then mocked her. Her husband Jacob's death in a sudden accident left her clinging to a failing farm. They whispered she should remarry or sell or vanish altogether. But Clara had endured, silent and steady as stone. And today, She stepped forward into the square as though moved by something deeper than defiance. "I won't buy him." Her voice carried across the platform, sharp as the crack of a whip. The crowd froze, startled into silence. Heads swiveled, jaws fell open. Clara walked forward, boots kicking up small ghosts of dust. Her voice rose again, firmer now. "I won't buy him because he's not for sale. I will free him." For a heartbeat, the town square was nothing but stunned quiet. Then the outrage erupted like a storm. "She's mad!" someone shouted. "Arrest her!" another bellowed. Morrison's smirk twisted into a snarl. "Free him? You'd spit on the law for this savage?" Sheriff Randall stiffened, his hand tightening on the keys at his belt. His voice lowered, rough with warning. "Clara, step back. This is no place for such talk." But she did not falter. Her chin lifted, her storm-gray eyes locked on his. "You speak of law, Sheriff, but where is justice? What law, of man or God, says we can chain a man and sell him like livestock?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. A child clutched his mother's skirt, whispering in confusion. Jace's gaze, dark and unreadable, flicked toward Clara. For the first time, something flickered behind his silence. Not pity, not disbelief, but recognition. Clara's hand shot forward. In a single desperate motion, she snatched the ring of keys from Randall's belt. The jingle rang out like a gunshot. Chaos exploded. Shouts clashed in the air. Curses hurled like stones. Men surged forward. Women cried out in alarm. "She's gone mad!" voices roared. "Stop her!" Clara spun toward the chains that bound Jace, fumbling for the lock with trembling fingers. Jace remained still, his shadow towering over her. His breath came slow, controlled. If this was freedom, he would not move until the iron fell away. Randall's hand hovered near his revolver, his face rigid with conflict. Law demanded he stop her. Conscience whispered otherwise. And then Morrison moved. He shoved past the front ranks of the crowd, fury darkening his heavy features. His pistol flashed into the sunlight, steel gleaming cruelly as he raised it. The barrel leveled squarely at Jace Callahan's chest. The square went deathly still. Even the horses seemed to hold their breath. Clara's key slid into the lock. Morrison's finger curled around the trigger. One heartbeat, another. The next breath in Dry Creek would decide whether chains fell to the dust or blood stained the boards. Clara's hand twisted the key just as Morrison's pistol steadied. The crowd caught between violence and redemption. The crash of iron against wood thundered through the square. Jace Callahan's shackles fell from his wrists, clattering to the boards like a war drum splitting the air. For one stunned heartbeat, Dry Creek froze. Then the crowd erupted. "Arrest her! Chain them both! Let's make them pay!" The mob surged, boots pounding dust, fists raised, voices raw with fury. At the center of it all, Clara Danvers stood small but unyielding, her storm-gray eyes blazing. She had torn the chains from a man branded savage, and now she faced the weight of the entire town. Jace did not run. He did not leap from the platform or vanish into the press of bodies. Instead, he turned, slow and deliberate, until his frame stood between Clara and the crowd. His broad shoulders, still marked by the bruises of shackles, became her shield. He was a wall of flesh and silence, daring every gun, every stone, every rope to reach her first. The roar faltered. Some blinked, confused. Freedom had been placed in his hands, yet he did not flee. Then a woman's voice cracked above the chaos, high, desperate. "Clara!" Martha Ellison pushed through the mob, her faded blue dress and flour-stained apron proof she had come straight from her kitchen. 35, with auburn hair slipping loose from its bun, she looked both frantic and furious. Hazel eyes brimmed with tears as she reached the platform. "What are you doing?" she cried, clutching Clara's arm. "You'll ruin yourself. Your farm, your good name, everything will be lost." Clara's voice came low but steady. "I know what I'm doing, Martha." "No, you don't." Martha's hands shook. "You've suffered enough since Jacob died. Don't throw away what little you have left, for him." Her eyes flicked toward Jace. For a man they called a savage. Jace did not move, but his jaw clenched. Each word struck him harder than the iron had. Still, he remained her barrier. From the other side of the platform, Dale Morrison's voice tore across the square, venomous and triumphant. You hear her? Even her own friend knows the truth. This widow spits on the law, disgraces this town, and sides with a horse thief. The mob stirred again, voices rising. Drag them down! She's mad! Sheriff Randall McKenna had stood silent until now, pale blue eyes flickering from Clara to Jace to Morrison's gun. At last, his voice cracked the air, gravel deep and commanding. Enough! The mob stilled. All eyes swung to him. Randall's gaze locked on Clara. His hand still hovered near his revolver, but he did not draw it. Clara Danvers, he said slowly, each word weighted. Do you understand what you've done? Clara lifted her chin. Her storm-gray eyes met his. I understand better than you think. Chains are not justice. I will not stand by while another innocent man is destroyed by lies. The words cut through the noise like a blade. Even those ready to shout fell into silence. Morrison barked a laugh, sharp and cruel. Innocent? He's a thief, Sheriff. You know it, I know it. And if you won't do your duty, then I damn well will. His pistol rose, steady now, the barrel gleaming under the sun. It leveled straight at Jace's chest. The crowd gasped. A child wailed. Somewhere a woman screamed. And for the first time, Jace spoke. His voice was deep, resonant, calm. If you want blood, take mine, but leave her out of it. The silence that followed was heavier than any roar. The mob, hungry for violence, hesitated. Even Morrison froze, finger quivering on the trigger. Sheriff Randall stepped forward, his jaw like stone. Dale Morrison, he said, his voice carrying iron, lower your weapon. That's an order. The air thickened, Morrison's lip curled, his finger tightening against the trigger. Clara's hand clutched Jace's arm, desperate, trembling. The sun burned mercilessly overhead. Dust hung in the stillness, a breath, a heartbeat. A half-second stretched into eternity. Morrison's pistol stayed locked on Jace's chest, and Dry Creek held its breath, waiting for the explosion that would decide whether one man would fall or justice itself would die on that platform. Morrison's finger tightened on the trigger, the pistol aimed squarely at Jace's heart. No one dared breathe. The shot that never came still echoed in Clara's ears long after she and Jace had left the square. Dust clung to their clothes, sweat stung their eyes, and behind them, the shouts of Dry Creek slowly faded into the wide silence of the prairie. Every step felt heavier, the weight of 100 eyes pressing against their backs. The road to Clara's farm was rough, little more than ruts carved into dry earth. Wind swept across the fields, carrying with it the smell of dust and sun-scorched sage. The land, once tilled and green, lay fallow now, clumps of brittle grass clinging stubbornly to ground that hadn't seen rain in months. Jace walked half a pace behind Clara, his hands free for the first time in weeks, maybe months. The skin around his wrists was raw and bruised, yet he carried himself upright, each step silent, measured. The only sound was the distant caw of a crow circling high above. At last, Clara's farm came into view. The small house sagged against the wind, roof shingles missing, paint peeled down to bare wood. The barn leaned precariously, boards darkened by years of weather, one side caved where a storm had torn through. Fences lay broken, posts snapped like bones. Clara hesitated at the gate, hand resting on the wood that creaked beneath her touch. For a moment, shame flickered across her face. The shame of showing a stranger, let alone a man she had just freed, the broken remnants of what once had been a proud homestead. This is it, she said simply. Her voice was tired, stripped bare. Jace's eyes scanned the property. He didn't sneer, didn't pity. Instead, his gaze lingered on the details. The weeds. A soft whinny broke the air. From the barn, a horse stepped into the light. Rusty, Clara's old gelding. His coat was sun-faded chestnut, his mane tangled, ribs faintly showing under stretched skin. Yet his eyes brightened at the sight of Clara, ears flicking forward. There you are, Clara murmured, her tone softening. She moved forward, stroking Rusty's muzzle. The horse pressed against her hand as though anchoring her. Jace stood nearby, motionless. Rusty's ears twitched toward him, nostrils flaring, but instead of fear, the animal only snorted once before returning his gaze to Clara. He doesn't spook easy, Clara said, glancing back. Not even at strangers. Animals see truer than men, Jace replied, his voice gravel low. the first words he had spoken since leaving the square. From the corner of the barn came a scatter of movement, small shapes weaving in and out of the broken boards. A handful of cats emerged, eyes gleaming, tails swishing. They padded closer, circling Jace without hesitation, brushing against his boots. One even leapt onto the fence, staring at him with an intensity that bordered on trust. Clara blinked. They don't usually take to people. Jace knelt, running scarred fingers over the back of one cat. The animal purred, arching, into his touch. He said nothing more, but the sight lingered between them like an unspoken truth. Inside the house, the silence grew heavier. The wooden floor creaked beneath their steps, dust motes drifting through shafts of sunlight that pierced the broken shutters. A table stood lopsided, one leg propped with a brick. A single chair sat by the cold hearth, and on the wall hung Jacob's shotgun, long untouched. Clara moved slowly, setting aside her bonnet. "I haven't had company in a long time," she said, her voice thinner than she intended. Jace's gaze lingered on the shotgun, then shifted to her. "Why?" Her breath caught. She turned away, her fingers brushing the mantel where a cracked photograph sat. Jacob's face smiling faintly from the faded image. "Because the town took my husband from me. They called it an accident, but it wasn't. Not really." Her words hung heavy, as if each syllable carried a stone. Jace waited. He didn't press, only let the silence stretch until she found the strength to continue. "Jacob was crushed," Clara whispered. "A barn wall gave way, but he had argued with Morrison that very week, over land, over water rights. And when I asked questions, doors closed. The sheriff said there was nothing to prove." Her shoulders tensed, her voice sharpening. "Morrison had everything to gain, and Jacob's death left me alone, with debts and whispers and a farm falling to pieces." For the first time, Jace spoke not in fragments, but in full. His tone was steady, edged with fire. "He took from you what he took from me." Clara turned, brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Jace's eyes, dark and unreadable, fixed on the floor. "Before they called me thief, I was a scout. I led soldiers through canyons they had never seen. I kept them alive when the land itself wanted them dead. Morrison was with them. He saw the valleys my people called home, and when I refused to help him claim what wasn't his, suddenly I was a criminal, a horse thief, a savage." His voice dropped lower, each word cut raw. "He branded me outlaw to steal what belonged to my tribe. The land, the water, everything." The truth hit Clara like a storm wind through broken glass. She gripped the back of the chair, steadying herself. Morrison's hand stretched farther than she had imagined, past her husband's death, past the lies told in town. The room closed in with its silence. Only Rusty's snort outside broke the weight. Then, in the stillness, the sound came. Hoofbeats, soft at first, then louder. A cluster of riders passing along the dirt road, their voices carrying faint on the wind. Clara stiffened, moving to the window. Dust plumed in the distance. 5, maybe 6 men on horseback, silhouettes dark against the afternoon sun. "They're looking," Clara said, her pulse quickening. "Morrison won't wait long before he comes again." Jace stepped closer to the door, his presence suddenly sharp, alert, his hands flexed unconsciously as though ready to fight, though no weapon hung at his side. Clara turned, meeting his gaze. For the first time she saw not just the branded outlaw, but a man bound to the same enemy who had stolen everything from her. The hoofbeats slowed. The riders' shadows stretched across the broken fence line. One horse whinnied, the sound slicing through the still air. And then, silence. Clara's breath caught as she pressed against the wall. Jace's eyes narrowed. Together, they waited. The riders stopped at her property line. One dismounted, boots crunching in the dirt, footsteps drawing closer to the ruined barn. The house trembled with the weight of what came next. Riders surrounded Clara's broken farm. A heavy boot struck the barn door, rattling it against its hinges. Jace and Clara stood frozen, knowing Morrison's men had arrived. The evening light was fading to a blood-red haze when the riders thundered into Clara Danvers's yard. Dust rose behind their hooves, settling in the brittle grass like smoke before a fire. 6 men dismounted, their spurs clinking, rifles slung low. At their head strode Dale Morrison, broad chest swelling under a dark vest, his face flushed with the pleasure of power. He cupped his hands and shouted, his voice carrying across the dying fields. "Danvers, you harbor a savage in your home. Hand him over now, or we'll drag him out ourselves." Inside the small farmhouse, Clara's grip tightened on the old shotgun that had once belonged to Jacob. The wood was scarred and worn smooth in places where her husband's hands had rested. She lifted it from above the mantel with fingers that shook but did not falter. Beside her, Jace Callahan stood silent, his body angled toward the door, every muscle coiled. He had lived too long with threats to be rattled by words, but Clara felt the air vibrate with his restrained energy. The barn door rattled under the kick of a boot outside. Laughter rose from the mob. "Come on out, widow. Show us the company you keep." Sheriff Randall McKenna arrived moments later, his wagon creaking to a stop, lanterns swaying in the twilight. The sheriff climbed down heavily, dust coating his long coat. His pale eyes took in the ring of armed men, then the small farmhouse. He raised a hand, his voice rough. "Morrison, stand down. This isn't law, this is mob rule." But Morrison sneered, turning to the sheriff with venom. "Law? That man's a thief, a savage. And that widow, she shames this town by keeping him under her roof. If you won't do your job, Randall, we'll do it for you." The men roared their agreement. One struck a match, holding the flame aloft, as though eager to test it on the dry timbers of the barn. Another shouted, "Burn them out!" "Let's see how long she hides then." Clara stepped to the doorway, Jacob's shotgun cradled in her arms. Her gray eyes locked on Morrison, her voice clear despite the pounding in her chest. "You call yourselves men? You'd burn a widow's home, murder a man without a trial? What justice is that?" Her words only fed the fire. Morrison's lips curled into a cruel grin. He spread his arms toward the mob. "You heard her. She admits it herself. She lives under the same roof with a savage. Is that what this town stands for? A widow's sin? A savage's bed?" Gasps rippled through the crowd, then angry shouts followed. The accusation burned hotter than any torch. Faces twisted, voices rose, and the frenzy swelled. Clara's cheeks flamed, but she did not lower the gun. "You're a liar, Dale Morrison, and you know it." The sneer did not leave his face. Instead, Morrison plucked the burning brand from one of his men and strode toward the old hay barn. His arm swung, and the torch sailed into the dry straw stacked inside. Flame leapt. Instantly, orange tongues racing up the brittle wood, devouring shadows. From inside the barn came a scream. "Help! Please!" It was high and piercing, the voice of a child. The mob startled, turning. Clara's heart froze. She recognized the voice, Annie Whitlow's younger sister, the little girl who sometimes wandered over to feed rusty scraps of carrot. Somehow, she had hidden herself in the barn before the men arrived. Now she was trapped. The fire surged higher, black smoke pouring from the broken boards, and Jace moved. He didn't look at Clara, didn't wait for a word. He sprinted across the yard, straight into the mouth of the flames. The mob shouted, some with laughter, others in shock. The heat washed across the yard, acrid and choking. Clara clutched the shotgun so hard her knuckles blanched, eyes fixed on the doorway swallowed by fire. Seconds stretched, each one an eternity. Then, through the smoke, he appeared. Jace emerged with the girl in his arms, her small body clutched close to his chest. His shirt smoldered at the shoulders, soot streaked his face, but his steps were steady. The child coughed, sobbing against him, her little arms wound around his neck. The mob fell silent. Even the crackle of fire seemed hushed by the sight. The savage they had come to destroy now walked through flame to save a child. The glow of the fire crowned him, smoke curling behind like a banner. He laid the girl gently on the ground, and Annie ran forward from where she had been hiding, wrapping her arms around her sister with tears streaming down her cheeks. For a long breath, no one spoke. Then Morrison's voice tore through the stillness, raw and furious. "Don't be fooled! This is nothing but a trick. He brings danger wherever he goes. He'll burn this town to the ground, and you'll cheer while he does it." Some men shifted uneasily. Guns lowered a fraction. They had seen with their own eyes what Jace had done. Doubt crept into their faces, softening the fury that had driven them here. Sheriff Randall took a slow step forward, his voice low but steady. "You saw the truth, same as I did. Morrison, you crossed the line tonight." But Morrison only bared his teeth, eyes blazing with hatred. He raised his arm, pointing at Jace as if condemning him before the gallows. "This isn't finished. You think saving one brat makes him a hero? Number. This is war, and I don't lose." He swung back to his men, his words of vow hurled into the firelit night. "Remember my words. This isn't over. This will never be over." As the flames roared higher, Morrison's oath hung over the yard like a curse. Jace stood with the soot-streaked child in his arms, the townsfolk staring in stunned silence. And Morrison's voice, sharp as steel, cut through the smoke. "This isn't over." Not by a long shot. The smoke from the burned hay barn still hung over the fields at dawn, drifting low and gray across Clara Danvers's farm. The ruins smoldered, black timbers collapsing into ash. For Clara, it should have been the smell of ruin. Yet, as she stood with Jace Callahan in the yard, it smelled of something else, of survival, of change not yet named but already stirring. Word of the night's fire had spread like wildfire through Dry Creek, and with it, word of the man who had walked into flame and carried a child back alive. By mid-morning, the first wagon appeared. It rattled down the dusty track, pulled by a swayback mare. At the reins sat Elias Olson, his wife Ruth beside him. Elias was in his late 60s, bent from decades of hard farm work, with wiry white hair under a battered hat. His face was etched with deep lines of sun and wind, but his pale eyes were sharp with quiet integrity. Ruth, round-faced and sturdy at 63, had dark braids streaked silver, and the kind of warm eyes that softened the hardest day. They climbed down slowly, bringing not weapons but tools, a hammer, nails, and a bundle of wooden boards. Ruth carried a basket of bread and preserves wrapped in cloth. Clara's throat caught as she stepped forward. "Mr. Olson? Mrs. Olson? Why?" Elias set down the boards, his voice gravel but steady. "A man who'll walk into fire for a child isn't the enemy of this town. Seems to me it's time some of us remembered what neighbors are for." Ruth pressed the basket into Clara's hands, her voice gentle. "You've been alone too long, dear." "Not anymore." Clara blinked back tears. Jace stood silent at her side, but his jaw softened, the hardness in his eyes loosening. By noon, more wagons came, farmers, shopkeepers, even the blacksmith, each bringing what they could, lumber, rope, shingles, sacks of seed. Some still glanced uneasily at Jace, but when their eyes met his, they did not look away as before. The yard filled with the sound of hammers striking nails, men shouting to one another, women kneading dough in Clara's kitchen. Children laughed as they carried scraps to Rusty, the old gelding, who nickered happily at the attention. For the first time in years, Clara's farm echoed with life. She worked alongside them, sleeves rolled, hair damp with sweat. Each nail she drove into the wood felt like a heartbeat of something she had thought long dead. Hope. Jace worked too, stripped to his undershirt in the heat, the scars on his back visible as he hauled beams and lifted rafters. When Clara passed him nails, their hands brushed. For an instant, their eyes met. There was no fear there, no pity, only a silent bond forged in fire and defiance. Later that evening, as the rebuilt skeleton of a barn rose against the sky, Clara found Jace standing apart. He was teaching one of the younger boys a few words in his native tongue, the syllables strange but melodic in the twilight. The boy laughed, repeating the words until he got them right. Clara approached quietly. "What does it mean?" Jace looked at her, a rare flicker of warmth in his dark eyes. "It means, stand strong." Her lips curved. Seems fitting. As the sun dropped, Ruth Olson drew Clara aside, away from the bustle. Ruth's face was thoughtful, her voice lowered. "I saw the marks on his back when he carried that timber. No man should bear scars like that. He's endured more than most, could survive." Clara's chest tightened. "He's borne more than scars. They tried to take his soul, and still he stands." Ruth touched Clara's hand. "And so do you." The moment hung tender between them, but it was broken by a shout from the road. A rider galloped in, his horse lathered with sweat. He reined up sharply, face pale beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Morrison's gathering men," he gasped. "Not a handful this time, a whole crowd." Says he'll finish what he started. The yard fell silent. Tools dropped, laughter died. Elias Olson swore under his breath. A lynch mob, he muttered. Bigger, meaner. He won't stop until blood spills Clara's pulse hammered. Around her, the people who had come to help shifted uneasily, their faces shadowed with fear. Jace stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. Then we stand ready. If he comes here, he'll find we don't break so easy. Some of the men nodded. Elias clenched his jaw, placing a steadying hand on his wife's shoulder. But Clara saw the doubt flickering in their eyes. And then, as the night wind rose and carried the smell of smoke still lingering from the burned barn, Clara understood. This was only the beginning. The night split open with the echo of horns and the thunder of hooves. From the ridge above Clara Danvers's farm, torchlight spilled like a river of fire. Dale Morrison had not lied. He came with more than a handful of riders. Dozens of men spilled down the slope, faces hard, guns flashing in the glow. In the yard, the gathered townsfolk faltered. Some gripped tools as weapons, others clutched lanterns. But their fear was a living thing trembling in their hands. Clara stood at the front, Jacob's shotgun braced against her shoulder, her gray eyes blazing. Beside her, Jace Callahan stood tall, no weapon but his own body, shoulders squared against the tide. Morrison's voice cut the night like a blade. "Hand him over! Hand me the savage, and maybe we'll leave the rest of you standing." Clara stepped forward, her voice carrying across the firelit yard. "You'll leave here with nothing, Dale Morrison. If you kill him, you kill justice itself in this town." Her words struck the crowd. Murmurs rippled. Faces turned toward one another, questioning. Morrison scowled, raising his arm. "Don't listen to her. She's bewitched you all, siding with a thief, a liar, a half-breed savage." At that moment, the sheriff's wagon rolled into the yard. The horses snorted, lanterns swinging. Sheriff Randall McKenna climbed down, his boots heavy on the earth. His hand hovered near his revolver, his pale eyes scanning the mob, the widow, and the man they sought to kill. For a long moment, the yard held its breath. Randall's voice rang out, gravel deep. "Dale Morrison, you claim law, but what you bring tonight is murder." Morrison sneered. "You're weak, Randall. Always were. Step aside." But the sheriff did not. His hand closed on his revolver, and at last he drew it, not on Clara, not on Jace, but on Morrison himself. Gasps swept the crowd. "Enough," Randall said, his jaw steel. "This town's justice doesn't belong to you, Dale. It belongs to all of us, and tonight, I stand with them." Silence thundered louder than any shout. Behind Randall, the Olsons stepped forward. Elias Olson's voice cracked but carried. "He saved our children. He's no savage. He's a man, and I'll stand with him, even if you burn me down beside him." Others echoed, voices rising, hesitant at first, then strong. One by one, men and women lowered torches, dropped ropes, shouldered tools. The mob that had come to kill began to fracture. Morrison's face purpled with rage. "Fools! You'll regret this, every last one of you." He raised his gun, finger whitening on the trigger, but Jace was faster. He stepped forward, his voice steady, carrying in the silence. "No more lies, Morrison. No more stealing lives and calling it law. Tonight, it ends." Morrison's eyes flickered. He saw the truth in Jace's stance, in Clara's shotgun leveled behind him, in the sheriff's gun aimed steady at his chest. Around him, the crowd no longer roared for blood. They stared, silent, the spell of his power broken. With a guttural snarl, Morrison spat into the dust. He holstered his weapon, his eyes burning holes through Jace and Clara. "This isn't over," he hissed. Then he turned, shoving through his riders, and vanished into the dark. The mob broke apart like smoke in the wind. Torches dropped, feet shuffled, until only neighbors remained. Neighbors with tired faces, but eyes that no longer turned away from Clara's porch. In the hush that followed, dawn's first light crept across the horizon. The fire in the barn ruins had burned down to embers, glowing red like a new beginning. Clara lowered Jacob's shotgun, her arms trembling, tears stinging her eyes. Jace stood still, soot-streaked and scarred, but unbowed. His gaze lifted to the lightening sky. For the first time, there was something softer in his eyes, something like belonging. Randall holstered his revolver. His voice was rough, but sure. Sometimes the law takes too long to catch up with justice. Tonight, justice found its way. First, Clara turned to the people gathered, the Olsons, the children clinging to their parents, the farmers who had come ready to fight. Her voice was quiet, but every ear bent to hear. We stood together. That's what saved us. That's what will save this town. Rusty neighed in the background, pawing at the earth as though answering her. Children laughed nervously, clinging tighter to their parents. Jace finally spoke, his words slow, deliberate. I was called an outcast. Tonight, you let me stand as something else. Not just a man surviving, but a man with a place. Clara met his eyes. And not alone. The rising sun spread gold across the fields, painting the faces of those who remained. For the first time in years, Dry Creek seemed less like a place of ashes and more like a place of beginning. Together, Clara and Jace stepped forward, not into chains or fire, but into the fragile promise of community reborn. Beneath the western sky, scarred by fire but lit by dawn, Dry Creek had changed. A widow and an outcast had stood against hatred, and in their defiance, a town remembered its soul. In a town that once chose fear over truth, it took the courage of a widow and the strength of a man once cast aside to remind everyone that justice is not bought, nor bound in chains. It is chosen together. Clara and Jace did not just survive the fire, the lies, or the mob. They showed that redemption can rise from ashes, and that the heart of a community beats strongest when it dares to stand side by side. In the quiet of dawn, Dry Creek was no longer a place of division, but a place reborn, proof that even the most broken souls can find belonging, and even the loneliest hearts can find home. If this story touched you, let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss the next journey of courage, love, and hope beneath the western sky.